We welcome back to the show Dr. Rob Pallitto. Dr. Pallitto is a professor of political science and public affairs at Seton Hall. He joins us now to talk about guns, the right to carry versus the consequences of some of the deadly shootings that we've heard about here in the United States. Doctor, it's good to have you here.
Good morning.
And let's talk a little bit about a few weeks ago we had a student kill 4 other students in a high school in Ohio, and of course that brings up the debate. Do we need tougher gun laws in our country, or do we perhaps need to have more people carrying guns? Your thoughts?
Yes. The interesting thing about gun rights as a civil liberties issue is that it's one area where our political tradition shows a real conflict. I mean, when a person asserts a right to speak or a right to be free from search and seizure, the consequences are usually to the individual. But here you have sort of competing rights, because on the one hand, advocates of gun rights say we should be able to carry guns, but on the other hand, the tragic shooting 2 weeks ago is an example of what happens when we don't have enough gun regulation.
So we have the Second Amendment. We also have something called a Heller rule. Can you explain the difference between the two?
Yes, for a long time in the United States, the battle over gun rights was fought more with political tactics, because there was no explicit Supreme Court ruling that said that there is a right to bear arms.
The Second Amendment gives us that right, gives people in the United States that right.
It does now. For a long time, the question was whether the Second Amendment refers to a collective right, saying that people can bear arms as part of, say, a state militia, or whether it allows individuals to bear arms. And the Supreme Court answered that question in 2008 in D.C. v. Heller by saying that the amendment does create an individual right to bear arms. And in that case, the question was whether a handgun ban, Washington, D.C. had a complete ban on handguns, could stand in the face of the Second Amendment. And so the court decided that it couldn't, because this right to carry guns for self-defense in one's own home was recognized by the Second Amendment, as the court said.
Now, of course, this amendment came out of the colonial times when the colonists had to arm themselves in the face of the British soldiers who were around. And so that was developed as a result of this collective effort to have a militia and fight off the British. But isn't that kind of outdated today?
I think so. I think that when we look at how to interpret the Constitution, we do have to think about the context that we're in now, so that when we look at each amendment, what it meant at the time that it was adopted, if we even know that, because of course we can't get back into the heads of the people who drafted it and voted on it. But what it meant at that time was one thing. What it means in our current context is another. When you think about the right to privacy as another example, obviously the drafters of the Constitution didn't know about virtual privacy, or about, they didn't think about the privacy related to reproductive rights. So we have new issues and conflicts that require us to think differently about these provisions now.
So are we going down a slippery slope of amendments to the Constitution?
Well, in my view, we are, because we can see that there have been a lot of lawsuits produced directly from the Heller ruling, because once the Supreme Court said there is a constitutional right for individuals to bear arms, then many times when a state enacts a particular gun control regulation, now there's a basis for a lawsuit. You can say, well, this violates my Second Amendment right, which was harder to say before because the Supreme Court had never come out and said there is an individual right to bear arms. So, for example, there was a case decided very recently in Maryland having to do with the standards under which states issue gun carry permits. And the federal judge in Maryland said that this law gave too much discretion to the state in deciding when to give the permit. So that is sort of changed. If the ruling survives on appeal, which it probably will, it gives the state less discretion to decide when to give a permit.
And certainly Georgia's laws are going to come into play there, because you have the Kennesaw law where you have all the adults that have to carry weapons, and you have laws in Atlanta where you can carry a weapon as long as it's open, as long as it's not concealed. And you see people on the trains carrying guns on their hips like it's the Old West.
Yes, yes. Having lived in Texas for 5 years, I mean, there's definitely sort of a cultural aspect where in some places that it's very important for people to be able to display guns, to carry guns. And then there's the concealed weapon question. So there's, of course, a right to own a gun, which is one kind of permit, and then a right to carry a gun and to carry a concealed gun, which is the second permit. There was a case in Texas that was decided just at the beginning of this year, and you don't think of Texas as cutting back on gun rights, but a federal judge in Texas actually said that that a law that allowed 18 to 20-year-olds to carry concealed guns was not protected by the Second Amendment, or in other words, a law that prohibited them from carrying those guns did not violate the Second Amendment.
We have a lot of crazy gun laws on the books. Let's do a comparison here with, say, Japan. It has a very hard laws against gun ownership. Period. The deaths there from gun violence far fewer than the U.S.
Yes, and I think that we can look at, there's a very strong cultural aspect, as I said, in the United States, where people place a lot of symbolic significance on the right to carry a gun or to own a gun. And unfortunately, that is reflected in interest groups like the NRA, who advocate for strong gun rights. And I think that many studies can show a direct connection between the amount of gun violence and the stringency of the laws. Also, the question is, how strictly are those laws enforced? Right. Mexico has very strict gun laws, but they're not enforced to the degree that the laws in Japan are.
And of course, you have the NRA saying, well, if guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. That's been their credo for many years. So,
all right. Dr. Pallitto, we thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you.
Good to have you here.